Welcome to the Kingsburg Community Church podcast, Thinking About Faith. We pray that this podcast helps you deepen your faith in God and stir some inner thoughts about the Christian life.
Hi, everyone. This is Pastor Ed, and this is another week. This is the 45th week? 45th week of the KCC podcast, Thinking About Faith. And we're continuing with 2 more weeks of looking to the Proverbs for God's wisdom in life. Again, there's good advice in the Bible. Not everything is a matter of sin and versus salvation. There's a lot of wisdom that's been accumulated together that just helps us in the decisions in life that really don't have deep moral implications, but it's just good advice. It makes life work easier. Timothy Keller, one of my favorite preachers, passed away about a year ago. He says that wisdom is competence with regards to the realities of life. Competence with regards to the realities of life. Wouldn't you like to be thought of as being competent in the realities of life? Number of years ago, when my son Ben was living in LA, just getting started in the music business, he was deeply involved with a church that was thriving in the kind of Hollywood arts scene. And he made the comment to Gretchen and I that he had this 2 groups of friends. There were his Christian friends from church and then his secular friends from the music industry. And he made the comment, with my Christian friends, their lives just work. And my non-Christian friends, I love them, but they're just kind of careening from crisis to crisis in their life. And I like the idea that the Bible gives us wisdom. It gives us solid ground to found our life on. And if we'll just follow the good advice in Scripture, our lives will work. There's no guarantees, of course. Bad things can happen. Mistakes happen. Tragedies strike. But on par, if you make good decisions, your life will go well. There's a balance in Scripture between trusting in God for His provision and His protection, and then doing what we can to use our own common sense or good sense to try to make the best decisions in order to be competent in those realities of life. And today we're continuing to look at what Proverbs says about our financial habits and the decisions we make in our financial lives. And today in particularly, we're looking at 2 common financial traps that were traps back 3,000 years ago when Solomon was writing most of the Proverbs, and they're still financial traps to us today. So these are areas, it's not a sin if you're in one of these financial traps, but it is irritating, it's burdensome, it's stress-producing. So you would want to use your wisdom to avoid these 2 financial traps. And the first financial trap that is very common and probably more common in our world today than it was in Solomon's time is that the Bible gives us great warnings against being in debt and in accumulating debt. Proverbs 22, verse 7 says, let the rich, it says, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is the slave to the lender. So there's this notion that if you borrow, you are enslaved to the lender because, of course, you owe that debt and you won't be free of that debt until you pay it off. Romans 13, written 1,000 years later, Paul says this to Christians, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. So Paul said to the Romans, debt can interfere with your life as a disciple. So don't let a debt remain outstanding, except the continuing debt to love one another. It may have been that Paul was particularly interested in preserving the good reputation of Christians, and that he wanted Christians to be free to do whatever God called them to do in those early years of the Christian church. And so because of that, he saw debt as an encumbrance that could either do damage to Christians' reputations or sap their freedom to follow God. Of course, even in Paul's time, that's 2,000 years ago, and times today are vastly different from biblical times. So we should pay attention to the principle behind the Proverbs, behind Paul's wisdom, because we're going to find, well, there may be, at least I think there's two great exceptions to the rule in our day, and I'll talk about them in a minute. Wisdom says that we should be very wise and cautious about going into debt. Have you noticed that whenever there's a car advertisement on television or something like that, it always shows the low monthly payment, and you have to search in the fine print, if you could see it, because it doesn't last very long in the commercial, in order to see the total cost of the car. And you have to look at the even finer print to find out how much you will pay principal and interest over the life of the loan. And I'm scandalized because my understanding is that you can now get a car loan that lasts 72 months. Now, I know that cars last longer than they used to, but 72-month car loan, that's a long time you're going to be paying for that car. And for most of that period, the value of the car is going to be less than the balance of the loan. I looked at my credit card. I've got a couple of credit cards. We use credit cards. We live in the modern world. But we pay our credit cards off every month, which is good practice. So to tell the truth, I never even look at what the interest rate is on my credit cards because I never use it. So I had to actually go online to see that currently the credit card I use the most has 19.49% interest on a balance that isn't paid. And I want to suggest that wisdom says paying almost 20% annual interest to buy something is not a good use of your money. You go out to eat, it's a wonderful dinner, you put it on your credit card, you don't pay it off. Over the course of a year, you're going to be paying 20% extra for that meal. It's just not a wise use of your money. I want to repeat that this is good advice. It's not a matter of sin. So I'm not saying that if you have credit card balances that you struggle to pay, that you're in sin. You're not. It's just not wise. And I'll bet you already know that. I'll bet that the unpaid balances on your credit cards create some stress for you. And because it's easy when you're paying those interest payments to see how quickly debt can consume your income. If you carry over your balances on your credit card, it's a good idea to make a plan to pay off those balances as soon as you can. This is probably going to require you to reduce your standard of living because your standard of living likely has been artificially high. It's just that you've been borrowing to sustain that artificially high lifestyle. So you may have to reduce not just to what your income says your standard of living ought to be, but even below that in order to pay the debt for the living that you did when you were accumulating that debt. Some things are, I think, fairly easy. Stop eating out. It's much cheaper to eat at home than to eat out, and likely it will be healthier as well. consider using cash instead of your card. There's something psychological where it's just harder to actually have to count out 5 $20 bills than to just put it on the card and say, oh, it's $100. You may be so far in debt that the wise decision is to consider either living in a cheaper home or driving a cheaper car. Perhaps looking for a second job can help you get out of a debt pit that you're stuck in. Canceling cable or switching to a cheaper cell phone. Always keep in mind how good you're going to feel when you pay off your credit card bill and when you're debt free. Now, I said earlier that I believe that there are 2 exceptions or partial exceptions to the rule about not being in debt. The world is different today than it was 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And I think in our world, if part of your goal of financial stability is home ownership, that it's impossible to buy a home, especially in California, without a mortgage. So you're going to have to borrow in order to buy the house. The principle of wisdom still applies, however, and that counsel would be to make sure the house that you're buying is well within your means. And there are a number of ways to do that. You may, if you don't qualify for the lowest interest rate, maybe that's the financial system's way of saying this is really too much house for you to buy. If you can't get a fixed rate mortgage, but you have to get an adjustable rate mortgage, that may be saying to you, you need to wait and accumulate more of a down payment, so you have to borrow less. I always counsel young people that perhaps it would be wise to look at a 15-year mortgage rather than a 30-year mortgage, just because it constrains the amount of house that you're out looking for. Chances are, people who sell houses always want you to pre-qualify so you know the maximum amount of house you can buy. And it used to be common wisdom that you always wanted to buy the biggest, the most expensive house you possibly could, because it was going to rise in value, and over time your income was going to rise, and so it would be easy to pay it off. There may be instances where that's still good wisdom. I don't know that that's true at the end of the inflationary cycle that we've had on housing in the last 20 years. I can't give you advice on that. But borrowing for a mortgage, something that doesn't depreciate and actually probably gains value over time, is not a violation of this rule of being in debt. I would say, and this is a personal preference, I would say the other area where I think borrowing can make some sense, and it's not in every instance, but borrowing for student loans, if you're pursuing a degree or an education that will qualify you to either enter a profession or a job, or to pay, to get a promotion where you're going to have more income, that's not a bad investment, because you're actually investing in your human capital. I do think it's wise to look at cheaper options. I know when Amy was at Davis, she took summer school at City College in Fresno every summer because those units were so much cheaper than going to Davis. I know a lot of people want to go to private Christian college. I think that's a great thing, to want to be around a Christian environment. But I know that there's a vast difference between tuition at, say, Fresno Pacific and a university like Whitworth or Westmont, very expensive schools, very fine schools, but very, very expensive. So, I don't think there's any hard and fast rule other than when you look at how much you're projected to owe when you graduate, you need to look at your expected salary and say, am I going to be able to pay off, let's say, $250,000 worth of student debt if I'm qualifying for a job that will pay me $60,000 a year. Let's say I want to be a elementary school teacher. At $60,000 a year, it's going to take you a long time to pay off $250,000. I would think you might want to see if there's a cheaper option for you to get that same degree. The Bible is so cautious about debt. It even says, do not, and this is Proverbs 22, do not be one who shakes hands in pledge or puts up security for debts. If you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched from under you. So don't be eager to shake hands and pledge, to sign that loan document. Make sure that you can pay for that debt, or you may lose everything, and you don't want to have to do that. There's a second area besides debt that is a financial trap that Proverbs talk about, and that is the financial trap of falling for get-rich thinking, get-rich-quick thinking. There are lots and lots of advertisements on TV, secret systems that are trying to sell you on the idea that you can accumulate wealth quickly and easily. And I think most of us who are my age will tell you, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And whether that's buying lottery tickets or investing in exotic meme coins or certain commodities that you don't know anything about. I know I watch a financial channel most mornings to see what the stock market's doing. And I know that there are people who are always encouraging people to trade options. And I don't know much about options. I just know that you can make a lot of money very quick because you can lose a lot of money very quick. And so unless you're very, very risk tolerant, probably not the best idea. Proverbs 13:11 encapsulates this warning against get-rich-quick thinking. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Do you hear that there's, even 3,000 years ago, there was this notion that wealth is accumulated little by little. If you have a mortgage on your house, that's a 30-year mortgage. It takes forever to pay off your mortgage, especially if you're a young person. It seems like 30 years from now, that just seems almost impossible. But eventually the 30 years come and you've paid off the loan and then you own your house. And that's a very great feeling of satisfaction. In Proverbs 28:19, the proverb says, whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. Worthless pursuits include schemes where people say, if you only do this technique that I've discovered, you'll be rich like me. And occasionally that's somebody who just happened to invest in Bitcoin when it was cheap and brand new, and now they're a millionaire, or just happened to invest in Microsoft when it was brand new, and now they're a millionaire, and now they're trying to tell you the secret. And of course, you just have to buy the book for $19.99, and then you can reduplicate it. That's like the person who got hit by lightning saying, don't stand at that intersection where I got hit because that's where lightning strikes. Well, lightning rarely strikes the same place twice. There's a principle of faithfulness over the long run that is able to reward you for your patience and your endurance. Proverbs 28:20, a faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. There's something about, I'm going to get rich, get rich quick. It rarely works like that. And I think if you look at the history, there have been books written about what happens to people who win lotteries. And the wealth doesn't stick around very long. I remember when Gretchen was first working at Valley Children's, there was a woman who was a traveling nurse who was only there for 3 months. And she and her husband were moving around the United States. And Gretchen got to talking to her once on a shift. And she found out that the woman had actually won her state's lottery. And I don't know how much money it was, but it was it was several millions of dollars. And so why was she working as an RN and why was she traveling around? Well, all the relatives and friends descended on her and wanted money for investments. If you love me, you'll help me have my dream restaurant that I want to open. If you buy me a house, then your grandchildren will have more space. It just became this thing, and they encumbered the lottery winnings was doled out in monthly increments, and they encumbered the monthly payments for the first couple of years. I think that was buying houses for their 2 children. And, then everybody else was hounding them and they were saying, we don't have any money. The money's all gone. And, people were mean to them and you don't love me or you're a false friend or, blah, blah, blah. And so to escape, they left their town behind, their state behind, and they were living on what she could make as a traveling nurse and living in apartments. And so, again, whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. Proverbs 20:21 says, an inheritance gained hastily in the beginning will not be blessed in the end. Inheritance means a return. Here it isn't just talking about the inheritance you get when somebody dies. So it's not talking about, if you murder somebody you're the heir of. It's not that at all. It's that if you want to amass a legacy of wealth that you're going to turn into an inheritance to your children, and you try to amass that hastily through a get-rich scheme, you will not be blessed in the end. There's a principle of responsibility that's operative here. Again, this isn't a matter of sin and salvation. It's just a matter of how we know the world works. You learn to be a steward of what God has given you a little at a time. So you start out poor. Remember when Rick Schul talked about getting out of college and starting out and living in an apartment here on Sierra Street. And, that's how we all learned. We were living in apartments. We were newly married. We were poor. We were paying off student loans. And you learn to be responsible one step at a time. I remember the first time we bought our first house, we were so afraid of, signing the loan documents and how much money that was going to be. And, I look back at it, laugh and think, boy, we should have bought 2 of those houses because what they're worth now would have been such a good investment. But you learn to be a good steward a little at a time. And then when you have greater wealth, you can act responsibly with your greater wealth over time. Okay, so 2 financial traps. Avoid debt, especially consumer credit. If you can, live below your means. I said last week, if you spend less than you make, you're going to be okay. And the second thing, don't listen to people who tell you that there's a secret to getting rich quick. It probably isn't true, and you'll be wiser if you accumulate wealth. Slow and steady wins the race. It's the way to be. All right. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week. Take care. Bye.